Hello everybody, this is Phil. I'm doing a video on the Fourth Amendment now. And as it pertains to actually the government seizing anything from an individual citizen and perhaps also their body, habeas corpus, okay, if they commit a crime. The Fourth Amendment is basically what regulates that. Should a crime occur, some kind of accusation the government is actually making against an individual citizen, or a bunch of citizens together that conspire to actually commit a crime. Each individual still has the Fourth Amendment right that protects them from unreasonable searches and seizures. Okay, in the news 2 weeks ago when Trump was stating, please excuse my head cold, when Trump was stating he'd rather seize the weapons first and then do due process afterwards, it was so far-fetched, it was so far from the realm of American jurisprudence and how we interpret and anticipate our law being applied equally to everybody, even those that are mentally deficient or have some kind of psychological issues that are basically medical issues in nature. Okay. I know for a fact that some people have had a diabetic seizure just by eating something or having a sugar rush, and then it drops so low that they've actually acted a lot different psychologically, where they're not criminal in nature, it is a medical situation in nature. Although their body and their minds are not working perfectly to give us information that they're okay. They might seem a little off. They might be saying slurred words. They might appear drunk. They might appear like they're addicted to something. Okay. Or there's just something really broke in their head anyways, where only the medical establishment can determine what's the best course for them in the future. In the meantime, we still have to go by the Fourth Amendment to make sure that they don't harm anyone, but their rights are protected as well. So I heard a lot of back talk and backlash against Trump, and I agree with that backlash. Trump really said something that was not American. It was basically shoot first, ask questions later, in so many words, in a different phrase. So I basically started researching the Fourth Amendment as a police officer, studying this in high school also, the Constitution in high school, the Constitution in college, because I wanted to be a police officer. There's other things to take into account with the Fourth Amendment too. Case law that already determined a lot of different intricacies on how the police and the government goes when interacting with the citizen and respecting their rights. A lot of these things, based on case law, already applied the Fourth Amendment to each individual case that occurred with a certain criminal, that occurred with a certain act, that occurred basically questioning a law that was on the books. Okay? You can't make anybody a criminal if there is no law on the books. If there is no law on the books about someone who is mentally ill, then you can't all of a sudden seize their property and act as if they are a criminal. They're two different things. But again, it's always best to get a court's professional opinion based on all that 200 years of case law as it affects that individual in the Fourth Amendment. It's just the way it is. Okay? A judge can make a determination sending an individual to actually see a doctor, to go to a hospital, see a doctor, and get the help he needs if something is broken in his brain where he's a harm to himself or he's a harm to other people. And again, if you're a harm to yourself and you already committed a law, broke the law, committed a crime by threatening someone, then the first thing is incarceration, then seizure of his weapons, if there is a warrant issued, or if it's in plain view of his arrest within arm reach or arm span. And then go accordingly afterwards, okay, well, if this guy is going to plead guilty to threats, he needs psychological help. The judge can work on that and make sure that there's some kind of order in his post-trial hearing that he receives the help he can to better himself with that medical situation that also bordered on criminal. So I did researching the law for over 20 years now, probably close to 30 years. The Fourth Amendment is pretty much written in stone. Courts in the past have actually helped the citizens instead of minimizing the Fourth Amendment to actually harm the citizens and incarcerate them every chance they can, to convict them every chance they can, to raise fines against them every chance they can. Okay? But again, back to Trump. What he stated about seizing the weapon first. If the weapon is not involved with the actual threats, you can't seize any weapon that's not involved with that actual threat. That's based on case law. That's based on the Fourth Amendment. And there has to be an articulable suspicion of probable cause that that weapon was connected to a crime. That's just the facts. The police officers know this better than most lawyers. Okay, most district attorneys, most U.S. attorneys, the DOJ, okay, and they apply it every day on the job when they place the handcuffs on people, whether it's for a medical, let's say, emergency where someone is not healthy and they're doing something that might harm them, or it's a criminal offense, a bona fide criminal offense. Police know this more than lawyers, trust me. Because they have to go to those same lawyers or a judge that's smarter than those same lawyers and write an actual statement of oath or affirmation. Okay? So the government, which Trump is government, he can't make blanket statements like that, let alone try to affect law based on an errant, bogus statement he made. Apply that to our Second Amendment rights also. Okay? You can't just say someone's a criminal based on an arbitrary law of what weapon they can own. Revert back to the Second Amendment. But they will violate your rights with the Fourth Amendment. They will violate the Fourth Amendment to get at you and diminish your Second Amendment. So the Fourth Amendment is the next biggest amendment behind the First and Second Amendments that you need to know. You need to apply to everyday life and know that the government can't infringe on your rights. I can't tell you how many people, when I was on the streets actually policing in Anacostia, D.C., I can't tell you how many people were like, man, you can't do that. You violated my rights. And I know case law, and I know how the individual's crime applied to that case law, and then the Fourth Amendment, and I knew I was covered on both. Okay? But if people understand their rights, they have a better idea of how to defend themselves against a tyrannical government. One that wants you disarmed, one that wants you powerless, one that actually is greedy enough to seize your money in taxation, which is illegal also under the Constitution, and seize your property without due process. Can't have that. Okay? The forfeiture law was made to attack major drug dealers. The U.S. government is the most major drug dealer in the world, with pharmaceuticals and the poppy fields over in Afghanistan. Okay? And you can't make this stuff up. So, that seizure law was to attack major drug dealers. Okay? Why? Because those major drug dealers are competition for the federal government, importing illegal drugs into the United States. Congressmen okaying very detrimental drugs that might kill their citizens, their constituents, but they get paid off by the pharmaceutical companies. I call them pharmaceutical companies because it's so foul. I know personally, firsthand, what those pharmaceuticals can do to people. The least of which, kill them. The worst of which, draw out their death for 10s and 20s of years. Okay? So, let's look at the Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, comma, houses, commas, papers, comma, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures, comma, shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Okay, reading this, and I wrote it down from the Webster Dictionary online. You can Google this. Have your children look this up on Google, write it down, and memorize it. Okay, as I was writing this down, I'm like, wow, the word warrant. And no warrants shall issue. The word warrants is capitalized, meaning they anticipated the law enforcement entities and government to apply for a warrant for any kind of criminal act where they're going to go seize somebody or seize property from that somebody. Okay? And what's the other capitalized word? Supported by oath or affirmation. Oath is capitalized. Why? Because that same government official is supposed to be as honest as possible that the government can rely on to enforce the actual real laws that the majority of society had said are normal, everyday laws we can live with. That representative of the government has to be of a high standard and swear to an actual magistrate or judge under oath or affirmation why the probable cause exists to search someone, to seize someone, and their personal effects. And it describes the exact location to be seized. So, let's go to that one individual that was a harm to himself. That might have had a medical emergency. That might have had a diabetic seizure or shock. And they were saying profound things, and most of the normal people around them were like, we got to call the police. The police have to come here. The police come there. And he's interviewing that person who might be mentally unstable. Again, in the back room or 2 rooms away. Okay? That is not a threat to that officer right there and then. If he wants to arrest someone and thinks threats are involved, he has to apply for a warrant to seize that weapon also. Is there a nexus between that weapon? Did he say he was going to shoot people? Or did he say he was going to mud stomp someone because he was having a mental breakdown? If he said he was going to mud stomp someone, then there is no nexus between that AR-15 down 2 doors down in the hallway and him having a mental breakdown. The police officer will be well in his rights if there's any paraphernalia, any drugs, any contraband, any weapons around his wingspan. How far can he reach out and grab it to place that individual under arrest and apply it to him in further charges? Or, based on probable cause with all the information he's taking in, right there and then that this person is mentally unstable, he effects the arrest right there and then reasonably to protect himself and others, to also get that man medical attention, to get that man medical attention at the nearest hospital, and he is seized only until he goes there and a judge okays that. He seized first, the judge swears off on the actual detaining of that individual, if not arrest, and the judge sends him to the hospital and makes sure that a doctor sees him and he is incarcerated for a 72-hour hold. That's how it usually works. Okay? But again, that person having a medical psychological emergency is not criminal. We got to look at it differently if we want to help people get out of the hole they're under and they're constantly psychologically dealing with their demons, taking all these bad medications, or they're self-medicating with a whole bunch of drugs and alcohol. And we're not going to help them. We're going to make them a criminal first because they own a weapon and not give them the help they need. No, we can just send them to jail. They'll be okay. I got another tick mark on my belt for incarcerating someone that needed medical help, not criminal help. He didn't need to be adjudicated, okay? Now, if you look through these things, okay, no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Okay, that's what Trump automatically violated when he spouted off He'd rather seize the guns first. Oh, of course. You, as a police officer, you have a right to live. You have a right to investigate because we tell you to investigate. You have a right to live. And if you see any weapon while you're doing your investigation, you have the right. And we demand that you be safe and you separate that weapon from who you are investigating. Case law already says that. But again, what is the nexus between that weapon and that individual? Is it an actual threat? He's going to kill himself, suck the barrel of the gun. Or I'm going to go kill my mom, and I'm going to use my AR-15 and she's always stealing money from me, blah, blah, blah. And there's an actual gun in the house. Well, like I said before, the detective would be smart and arrest the individual for the crime of threats right there and then. He would seize any other weapon in the house that that individual could use in that threat, even if it's 2 doors down. But again, he has a right to separate the weapon initially from who he is investigating for his own safety while he's investigating. We ordain that. We order that to occur. But the Fourth Amendment is very, very, very simple. It's written in stone, and there's no violating this Fourth Amendment. If some of that same case law doesn't add up to this Fourth Amendment, most of it does. And the Supreme Court has been pretty good in saying, government, you fucked up. Government, you can't do that. Government, you can do this based on your experience, based on years of practice of law, based on enforcing the law out on the streets. If you look at expert drug experts, so to speak, vice detectives, which I was, they know the law very well, in and out, what they can seize based on the common principle of, the suspect doing the same thing over and over and over again when they're committing this specific crime, selling drugs. Simple things like actions, like hand-to-hand on the corner, looking over your shoulder, going to a trunk, pulling out something, then giving something to someone that just walked up to them for an exchange of money. You see that a few times, you can tell it's not anything else but a drug deal going down, and it's illegal. So that's automatic probable cause to search that person, seize his money, seize any weapons on him, and go in and out of every little crevice of that car. Okay? Officials or police officers of the law understand this, and the lawmakers, the delegates who make the law in each state, in each jurisdiction, they understand this. And that's where the government has more rights than you would think to basically enforce the law, and you're fighting a losing battle because you got caught. Okay? But again, if those little laws don't adhere to the Fourth Amendment, especially medical law, okay, every single time you're talking about a medical situation, you have to apply for a warrant. If you're talking about looking at my history or anybody else's history from 20 years ago and what a doctor said then, and then you're going to curtail my Second and First Amendment rights, okay, you need a warrant, first of all, and that probable cause. Okay, that probable cause is the only thing that the judge should look at and say, well, this is reasonable, or this is not reasonable. You want to seize his car for drugs and narcotics, but you're also saying that his 3 houses you have a right to search. Based on what? Did you see him go in the house after each transaction, or did you just see him leave with the car and then go home afterwards, and you want to seize the house? If that was the case, you have no probable cause to go into that house. I'm sorry. You have no probable cause to seize that house just because you think he's a drug dealer now. There has to be nexuses. Okay? Probable cause is also before, during, and after a crime occurred. Police officers from the government can investigate you if they suspect you're doing activity that is leading to a crime. Okay? Let's say you pout, and you run into a drugstore, okay? And you look grubby, and you look like you're strung out on something, and the police officer is looking at you. He has a right to follow you in and investigate why you're doing what you're doing. His experience might say that you're strung out. You're acting a little more insane than the average, citizen. he might know by experience your actions are leading to a shoplifting offense or boosting. And so we entrusted him to investigate you further. What about during a crime? Okay, someone holding a gun, okay, in their car, and they're driving around crazy or something, and a citizen sees them, and the citizen seems sane, so it seems like a viable report, and the police officer looks at the guy and it's like, yeah, that's the same car in the lookout, that's the same individual, and oh my God, he does have a gun, and he's right outside a bank. He's most likely going to rob a bank, or he's assisting someone robbing a bank as a crime is occurring. He can seize that person and everything in the car within wingspan, mind you. And he can seize that person and all his rights right there and then while he's still investigating. Then he can go in the bank and see if there's an additional suspect in there actually robbing the bank. Okay, where they're conspiring to rob a bank. Okay, and that a crime has occurred. Look at any homicide. Police get there 5 minutes late and someone's shot to shit. Bullets in them everywhere. The brain splattered on the sidewalk, in the curb. That is a crime that had occurred, and finding shell casings around are basically open in plain view. Okay, and part of that same crime, that tells you that a crime already had occurred and you're 5 minutes late. Then they have to go back to the Fourth Amendment, and every bit of information they take, how does that build upon probable cause to arrest the individual that actually shot that person? Okay? It's very open and shut. If you look at Fourth Amendment case law on how it applies to seizing the person and arresting them, and how they're searched and how evidence is seized to basically convict them and add to the more than preponderance that the person actually committed the crime. That's another thing about going to court. In civil trials, you only have to prove 51% of your case to win it. In a criminal court of law, it's a much higher standard. The government has to prove basically 75 to 100% that that suspect, that defendant, actually committed the crime, based on the Fourth Amendment and all the information and evidence that they seized. Okay, and Miranda is one of those extra laws past the Fourth Amendment that applies to the Fourth Amendment. You can't force anyone to say what basically confess to a crime. It also has to do with the Fifth Amendment, mind you. But Miranda is one. New York versus Belton, Delaware versus Prowse, Ohio versus Terry versus Ohio. Okay, all these case laws, if you look up, you'll know exactly when your government is stepping out of line trying to seize something of yours. They have no business seizing. They have no business taking. They have no business putting handcuffs on you, even if it's a temporary detaining. Okay, temporary detention, but I mean detaining you right there on the scene. You know, white people get stopped all the time and put in cuffs. Then they're driven back to a location where a crime occurred. They call it a show up. Okay, and the witnesses at that original crime scene basically look at the individual and say, yes or no, that was the suspect. Okay, there is a lot of law right there and then that you should know that the police get away with based on having the exact description. You look just like another criminal. But what if it was a black man and you're a white man seized? Okay, you have good grounds for basically a lawsuit in the millions of dollars. If it was a black man taken and it was an actual white suspect that witnesses said and that police officer misinterpreted, but he went and seized a black man with the same almost identical clothes on, multi-million-dollar lawsuit. You don't think so? Because they weren't being reasonable. Being reasonable means you take all the information in and you dissect it and you work accordingly under the law. So let's read this again. And I hope you share this video and send it to the younger people. Okay, because I'm 49 years old and I can tell you the 20-year-olds, the 21-year-olds that are going through the police academy don't even have this mindset about the Constitution protecting people, and that's how we should look at it. Okay? America does not have any idea what the Bill of Rights states unless they watch Law and Order SUV for 10 years eating bonbons on the couch. But let's read this again. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable seizures, unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Okay? When it says, I remind you one last time, when it says, and no warrant shall issue, that's also a shot across the bow of the judiciary. They need to be diligent and know what flies in the face of good law enforcement and what doesn't. No warrants shall issue. That means the judge signing off on any warrant for a search or something to be seized has to know what that police officer is saying and is it reasonable. If that judge does not know that and eventually the case goes to trial, the guy is convicted, they can go all the way back to that original warrant and appeal it and appeal it and appeal it until they win, until it goes to the Supreme Court. Okay, there are so many cool issues with the Fourth Amendment. If you hadn't seen it in law enforcement before, please read it. Please read a lot of case law in your own state and how it's applied. Okay, but if that case law, remember this, if that newer case law does not match up to that Fourth Amendment, speaking of which, Trump saying seize weapons when there's no probable cause, and then that individual citizen has due process after the fact? No. No sane person in the world would allow the government to do that. Okay? But again, your medical rights are first and foremost because of the Fourth Amendment. It doesn't matter what any gun grabbers say about your rights to carry a weapon. They can't seize your weapons without that Fourth Amendment being adhered to. Thank you, guys. I hope you share with everybody. Be safe out there, okay? Because these gun grabbers are a bunch of communists. They're communists that basically want war, and they're agitators, okay? They're godless, and they don't care if you live or die, okay? And they will use every social situation they can to put the onus on a corrupt government to violate everybody else's rights more and more, okay? Do you really want to be a criminal under the Second Amendment and the Fourth Amendment just because the government says you have no rights to carry the weapon you want? And we can go ahead and go into your house just because some Democrat down the street said, oh, this guy was bad, this guy did this guy, oh, you got to enforce this law because those guys own weapons? No. You have the law right there on Google. Look it up. Hey, share this video around, and I hope it helps people because I can tell you from experience, the Fourth Amendment is one of the few amendments that case law actually, from our government in our past, actually protected us from a tyrannical government. So a lot of that judiciary actually worked to help us research a lot of that case law too, based on the Fourth Amendment. Thank you. Have a great day.